What does freedom mean? Where do we find it? How do we lose it? Did we ever really have it in the first place? Thank you to Helix Sleep for sponsoring this video. I am someone who simply cannot function at all without a minimum of 8 hours of sleep. Unfortunately, my brain loves to make that really difficult for me, and I often have quite a bit of trouble falling asleep, which is why I think having a good mattress is really important. Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your needs and conveniently shipped right to your door. Everybody's different, and Helix knows that, so they made the sleep quiz to match your unique body type and sleep preferences to make the perfect mattress for you. They have something for everyone's unique taste, and if you sleep with a partner, you can even take the sleep quiz together to find something that's a perfect compromise for both of you. I am personally a stomach sleeper. I prefer a medium firm mattress, and, exposing myself, I sleep alone. Based on my results, Helix matched me with their Helix Dusk mattress. I've had it for over a couple months now, and I'm really loving it. The mattress is so comfortable and balanced that I've slowly stopped waking up with the pain in my lower back. Compared to my previous mattress, which was about 13 years old, it's a dream. It's also really, really easy to purchase online. With your Helix Sleep mattress, you get a 100-night sleep trial, along with a 10-year warranty, and there are also financing options and flexible payment plans. If it makes you nervous to buy something that you haven't tried yet, you get more than 3 months to make sure that you love it. If you don't, they'll pick it up for you and you'll get a full refund. The best part is, if you live in the US, Helix delivers your mattress right to your door for free. It comes nice and rolled up in a box and is super easy to set up for yourself. I love my Helix, and I think you would too. If you're looking for a new bed, I recommend you check it out. Click on the link below or go to helixsleep.com/broey for up to $200 off your Helix Sleep mattress plus 2 free pillows. That's helixsleep.com/broey for up to $200 off today. It's been 9 years since we first experienced the controversial phenomenon that was Harmony Korine's Spring Breakers, and almost a decade since it first premiered at the Venice International Film Festival in 2012. This was a time where clean hipsterdom and the trash aesthetics of the early 2000s were beginning to converge. It was a pre-Me Too time of tentative sexual revolution, where the slut walk, choice feminism, and the tail-spinning Disney girl were dominating the zeitgeist. A time where cultural aesthetics were pioneered by waifish Tumblr it-girls like Alexa Chung, Atlanta de Cadenet, and Cara Delevingne, and co-opted by dirtbags like Terry Richardson, Robin Thicke, and American Apparel's Dove Charney. When precociousness and raunch made bedfellows, an indie sleaze was born. Indie sleaze really is the best way to describe it. It perfectly encapsulates this transitional time by embodying that fragile balance between women's renewed sexual agency and the sinister undercurrent of exploitation that followed it.
He makes you feel like you're being a prude or you're somehow weird if you're not willing to just go with the flow because it's all cool, it's all fine, and
but it's not all cool and it's not all fine because at the end of the day, if you don't do these favors, you don't get photographed by Terry Richardson, you don't end up in Harper's Bazaar. So it's not all cool and all fine, right? It's not like this cool free love thing. It's actually a business proposal.
Pressure. Yeah.
Spring Breakers came out when I was 16, and I remember this time well. It was an era where I was discovering my own sexual agency as mainstream feminism began a new cycle. But this newfound freedom had a darker edge, and like Candy, Faith, Britney, and Cody, my friends and I were blissfully ignorant of it, blissfully free from the idea that there could be men waiting in the shadows, hoping to exploit our desire for that freedom. Truly, if there was ever a film to define such an ambiguous era, it's Spring Breakers. With its shocking casting and provocative marketing campaigns, Spring Breakers took the world by storm. The film is directed by notorious indie filmmaker and artist Harmony Korine, who had become known at this point for his almost performance art style antics on late night talk shows.
You know, I just wanted to make a sequel to Caddyshack, and and then I used to live by this guy, and he was a Hasidic Jewish, and he played and he always played with basketballs, and his father was a dentist. But once I was walking down the street, and he said, "You're a sinner," like that.
Said that to you, yeah.
So I just wrote it.
Okay, with that as background, now if we could...
And for writing and directing some of the most controversial films of the past 2 decades. I mean, the man made a film called Trash Humpers. But to this day, he wields a great deal of respect in the industry, and that respect wasn't gained from pure shock value. His films, bizarre as they are, unflinchingly strip the artifice of American life and lay bare the ugliness beneath. He's a master of discomfort. You'd be hard-pressed to find a person who has a middling opinion of Korine and his work. Either you love it or you hate it, and Spring Breakers isn't really any different. Our attentions perked in 2012 when press photos were released of female stars Selena Gomez, Vanessa Hudgens, and Ashley Benson, fresh out of their Disney and young adult eras, and scantily clad in neon bikinis with looks of defiance on their faces. Whether it was out of curiosity, shock, or titillation, the imagery was powerful enough to get people to go out to the theater in droves. Yet, what we saw in theaters was completely different from the fast-paced, sexy crime drama that was promised by the press photos and trailer. What we got instead, in typical Korine fashion, was a slow-grinding, plotless arthouse film, filled with long montages, repetitive chants, and really strange improv.
These 3 girls in front of me. I can't believe what I said. How can this be? They're like mermaids, come up from the sea. Close my eyes. Every time I look, they're like old-fashioned straight out of bud.
Seldom has a mainstream film been so divisive, so frustrating, and yet so enduring. To this very day, people try to adopt the aesthetics of Spring Breakers, yet few can actually say they enjoy watching it. A decade out from the film, and I think we can look at it with clear eyes. Is Spring Breakers a movie that's definitively bad or good? It's definitely cool and provocative in an aesthetic way. Maybe sometimes aesthetics are the most important thing in film. I mean, as Marshall McLuhan famously said, the medium is the message. But does Korine's use of the indie sleaze aesthetic make his film subversive, or was he just inducting another work of hipster sexism into the 2010s canon? Hindsight is 20/20, so maybe after all this time has passed, we'll finally get some answers. Spring Breakers, like Korine's other films, is really weird. Filmed by Benoit Debie, who had recently come off working with Korine's European twin, Gaspar Noé, on Enter the Void, Spring Breakers has a distinctly impressionistic vibe to it. The film begins with 4 good friends, Brit, Candy, Cody, and Faith, trying to figure out how they can get money to travel to Florida for spring break. While Faith is more moralistic than her friends, Brit, Candy, and Cody have no qualms about obtaining the cash through whatever means necessary. So, wearing ski masks, they rob a nearby restaurant with water guns and burn the getaway car. All 4 girls travel to Florida together and go buck wild until they're arrested for using narcotics at a party and are later bailed out by a local rapper named Alien. This is when things take a turn. Faith, who expresses discomfort with Alien's friends and lifestyle, goes back home, leaving Brit, Candy, and Cody alone without a moral voice to ground them. On top of being a mediocre rapper, Alien is also a relatively successful drug dealer who's been hustling on the turf of his old friend Big Arch. Big Arch thinks Alien has been overstepping his reach and threatens him and the girls in a drive-by shooting where Cody gets injured and has to go home. Now it's just Alien, Brit, and Candy left. The girls enter an intimate relationship with Alien and vow to help him get revenge on Big Arch. They boat to his house where Alien is immediately gunned down and killed, and the girls proceed to kill everyone on the premises. The last shot shows the girls wearing pink balaclavas and tiger swimsuits, kissing Alien's dead body before running off into the night. And then Ellie Goulding's Lights plays as the credits roll by. From start to finish, the production process was anything but ordinary. Kareen says he started the film off with a vision of girls in bikinis and ski masks wielding guns on the beach, and basically built it from there. He also went to an actual spring break location to write a script, which proved to be a bit of an impractical choice.
During spring break, there were kids puking on my door, f***ing in the hallways, lighting shit on fire. There were midgets having sex and chandeliers. I found a jawbone in a carpet. It was pretty crazy.
The editing process was also far from regular.
So we would edit to like temp tracks by Skrillex and Cliff Martinez, the two composers on the film. And then I would call them back in, and when we're starting to get this, I was starting to develop this style, and I was saying, okay, it could work. Because in the beginning, when we were filming, I was nervous. I wasn't sure I could make it work. And then when I was like, oh, okay, this is going to work, I brought in the composers, and we would sit in there and start to play around. And the music is really an equal component to the picture.
Kareen had said that this process emulated the loop-based and repetitive tracks of electronic and dubstep music in an effort to, quote, obliterate the sense of time and go with something that was more like a feeling.
In my mind, I'd been trying to develop this style for a while, or this idea of motion and liquid narrative. I wanted to make a film that had very little dialogue, that was more sensory, that was more like something as an experience.
It's one of those instances where a director builds his themes into the medium of the film itself, rather than into the plot or dialogue. While the film is hard to pin down, there are some messages you can take away from it. The primary one being the corruption of the American dream. Kareen wanted to center his film during spring break, a yearly event where young college students trek en masse to Daytona, Panama City, or Fort Lauderdale to drink, do drugs, and debase themselves away from the watchful eyes of their parents, or RAs. The setting is the perfect allegory for American culture. As Kareen puts it, even the phrase spring break and what it represents, what it can be, the idea of a destruction of innocence and disappearing into the night. Coming out of the era of Girls Gone Wild and MTV's Spring Break, these beautiful getaways in Florida became a hub for debauchery. This was a pilgrimage of fast pleasures, fleeting attempts at fame, and a chance to be literally anyone else for a week. Kids head to Florida to glutton themselves with alcohol and scream freedom, and isn't that what the American dream is really about? It's not the white picket fence and big house that we're fantasizing about. It's commodified sex, crime you can get away with, and extreme flashy wealth. Rapid escalation and temporary relief.
I'm about stacking change, y'all. Stacking change. That's it. Money. I'm about making money. That's the dream, y'all. That's the American dream.
The real American dream is a debauched fantasy, an artifice of freedom. And that's what Kareen, through his seemingly superficial, plotless, and meaningless film, is trying to sell us.
It's meant to be about surfaces. The culture is about surfaces. It's meant to be like candy.
Philippa Snow describes this paradox best. Spring Breaker's satire and critique is grounded in the obverse. Lacquering his abnegation of a failing dream with gorgeous, covetable dumbness, Kareen helps ensure his movie floats like a bimbo and stings like a bee. But Kareen has never been a filmmaker who's interested in morals. Spring Breakers places no value judgment on the American dream, spring break, or the people who attend it. Rather, he simply tips over the surface of the dream and shows us its underbelly. So why am I attributing indie sleaze to this film? Well, if we're to compare the press photos to popular photography of the time, you can see some pretty obvious similarities. Overexposed flash and white backdrops, very youthful looking girls, bright colors, semi-nudity, and when we look at the film, we see a reliance on party visuals quite reminiscent of Project X, another movie that came out in 2012. Slow motion shots of body parts, drinking, and grime. But indie sleaze is more than just clothing and photography. It's a bit of a philosophy. Indie sleaze is a marriage of clean and trashy. It's about the gross, grimy, and tacky, but most of all, it's a celebration of not giving a fuck. I spoke to my friend Carrera, who works as a trend forecaster, to get her perspective on indie sleaze and what it's all about. This is how she defined it. Indie sleaze is an aesthetic trend that finds nostalgia in the early 2010s era, a time characterized by naughty Polaroid pictures, ironic hipsterdom, mustache finger tattoos, American Apparel shiny leggings, and candid club photography. The early 2010s was a time that praised youthful transgressions. With the rise of sites like MySpace and Tumblr, many would share highly stylized images of sexually playful partiers having candid moments of explicit joy. Images of women, often white, with smudged eyeliner, barefoot with a PBR in hand, became a kind of idealized anti-glamour that came to define a generation of cool. Essentially, the indie sleaze aesthetic is all about exuding an aura of carefreeness. In an article for Harper's Bazaar about the recent resurgence of indie sleaze, Mark Hunter, photographer and runner of the popular 2000s blog Cobra Snake, says, "It was an organic, free-spirited time of not caring, which I think people crave. When you look at my photos, people look like they're having the best time of their life. They're not focused on the phone in their hand or posing for the camera. They're living, basically." This article also quotes current blogger Mandy Lee, who says indie sleaze was all about authentic, genuine fun and freedom. Now, the concept of freedom is something that Spring Breakers tackles head on, and it actually complicates that concept even further with its casting choices. The aura of Britney Spears is invoked many times throughout Spring Breakers. If it's the girl singing "Hit Me Baby One More Time" outside a convenience store, or a slow motion scene of Alien playing Every Time at a grand white piano, it's clear that Corinne's use of her music is pretty deliberate. Britney, a former Disney star turned sexed-up pop idol and later paparazzi bait, is the emblem of exploited girlhood. So it's overwhelmingly obvious to anyone who knows this that when Corinne decided to cast Selena Gomez and Vanessa Hudgens, who were made in Spears' image, he was making a point. There's a very meta element at play here. The girls in the film are impressionable but ruthlessly ambitious. Their fast corruption within the film is paralleled by the corruption of the Disney actresses' images within its marketing. Remember, the film came out around the exact time that Miley Cyrus was releasing her Bangers album and being photographed by Terry Richardson. This was potentially the peak of our public fascination with the corruption of good girl idols. Shortly before the film was released, Gomez issued a statement on her Facebook, "Note, this movie is not for my littles." Corinne was keenly aware of the public's sometimes genuine and sometimes perverse excitement at this transitional time in the Disney Girl era.
I do have a younger generation of fans that support me and that mean a lot to me. Everything that I do is for my fans. My music, my shows, my clothing line, everything is for them. And so whenever I took on, this movie and all the rest of the films that I was a part of this year, I knew that they weren't going to be very suitable for that generation. So I just meant that it was hard in that aspect, and plus I think it's hard for people to take me seriously that way because of the brand that I've been given.
Gomez, Hudgens, as well as Benson and Corinne's wife Rachel, who stars as Cottie, all maintain that this was a deliberate choice on their parts. Gomez especially frequently cites that this film was a departure from her usual because she was doing it for her.
Sure, but it's not necessarily me breaking out of anything. It's just me doing something that I really want to do. I'm super passionate about the acting part of what I do, and I just want to do stuff for me sometimes.
And Hudgens often cites the amount of freedom she was afforded on set.
We trust harmony, and we trust each other, and I think that's where you're safest. In a safe environment, there's trust, and we have so much love for each other, and harmony would just give us the freedom to play, and that's an actor's dream, to just take scenes and do what you want with them, and to be completely free.
Now, there's a frequent debate in the transition era of Disney girls like Gomez, Britney Spears, and now Olivia Rodrigo about whether this change is coming from them or a team of pervy men. Corinne seems to be commenting on this implicitly through his very meta casting, yet it's hard to paint any of this as necessarily altruistic. I'm not 100% that he did this to gift Gomez or Hudgens the freedom that they never had. Corinne seems to have taken great pleasure in exploiting their already hyper-commodified images. He says, "There's obviously something very exciting about working with these girls who are, in some ways, in real life, representative of that culture and that pop mythology, and also people who the public can identify as personalities that are complete contrast to what they're portraying in this film. I love that that part is a conceptual shock on top of the actual film." Much like the kids on Real Spring Break and like their characters in the film, this was an opportunity for the Disney girls to pretend to be someone else for a change. Knowing he wanted to mimic the actual debauchery of Spring Break, Corinne hired thousands of extras to go crazy on and off camera. He threw the girls into this environment with intentionally minimal security and encouraged them to party alongside everyone else. While this all made for very believable filmmaking and probably a really fun filming experience, it appears that Corinne himself may have been deriving a similar pleasure from the corruption of these girls as male audiences would and did. As I said at the start of this video, this was a transitional time in the realm of sexual politics, where feminism hadn't yet entered the mainstream, and women's renewed sexual liberation was underscored by a current of men waiting to take advantage of that. Now, I'm in no way comparing Harmony Korine to sleazebags like Terry Richardson and Dove Charney, who knowingly took advantage of the women under them. It's obvious that Korine fostered a healthy relationship with his cast members and ensured that their experience was a fun and consensual one. Not a single one of them has anything bad to say about him, and ultimately, I don't think his film is morally wrong in any way. But I do think using the iconography of Disney actresses within the indie sleaze aesthetic does kind of speak to the double entendre of early 2010s culture. The lead girls in the film appear to be in control of their sexuality at all times, but there are always men like Alien waiting in the sidelines to use that to their advantage. And with the meta casting, the question extends to real life. Were the actresses in control of their sexed up images, or were they exploited? Snow attempts an answer. It's possible for women in a movie to be neither disempowered or empowered by its narrative, and for a gaze directed at nude and near-nude girl bodies to feel neither male nor female, but apparently agnostic, so that 4 babes, 2 of whom are former Disney starlets, look and act less like Lolita stereotypes than like 4 adult adolescent Mobius strips and booty shorts. I've said this in reference to Paul Verhoeven's films, and I think it applies here, but Spring Breakers is so over-the-top and gratuitous that it's hard to find it as anything even remotely sexy. What makes filmmakers like Korine so smart is that they use genre to invoke double meanings within their works. Spring Breakers lures people in with its salacious marketing, but those who really love weird art house films, or love what Korine's all about, are able to derive an underlying meaning from the genre of the film itself. For me, watching it 10 years later was actually a huge breakthrough. With all its superficiality, melodrama, satire, and gratuity, I finally figured out how to pin down Spring Breakers. It's an exploitation film. The entire concept of indie sleaze is kind of exploitative. The trash, raunch, and provocativeness embedded within it make for a great new update to the exploitation genre for the 2010s. And I'm gonna deign to argue here that Korine's use of it makes Spring Breakers the last great exploitation film of our time. What is an exploitation film, you ask? Exploitation films are not so much a genre as they are a mode of production. These are films which rely on the social taboos of the time they're made as an easy way to entice viewers. As human beings, we're naturally curious and inclined towards morbidity, sexuality, and gratuity, things that'll easily seduce us into buying tickets. These films throw budget and quality to the wind as an expedient way to tap into the basest of human desires. While these films are often looked down upon for their association with low culture, they can actually be pretty radical and subversive. They reveal elements of our culture that mainstream media is less likely or able to comment on. There's something really subversive about being bad. Cultural historian Jeffrey Sconce investigates this theory in his essay, Trashing the Academy, Taste, Excess, and an Emerging Politics of Cinematic Style, where he defines films that exist on the fringes of the industry as paracinema. He says, "The explicit manifesto of paracinematic culture is to valorize all forms of cinematic trash, whether such films have been either explicitly rejected or simply ignored by legitimate film culture." In Sconce's mind, paracinema has created a cult of moviegoers who share a very developed and distinct taste for the, quote, temple of schlock. Spring Breakers, because it operates in superficiality alone, is a decidedly exploitative film. The marketing campaign uses icons of purity and sleazy aesthetics to shock and entice viewers. The film itself contains a ton of graphic nudity, bombastic music, violence, and a very noted, I think intentional appropriation of Black culture to keep you watching, however confused you may be. And most importantly of all, it's a sensory film. The exploitation is baked into the very way the film is made. Sconce describes the style of paracinema as a sort of aesthetic aberrance. He says that a focus on style and aesthetics is crucial to paracinema. By concentrating on a film's formal bizarreness and stylish eccentricity, the paracinematic audience, much like the viewer attuned to the innovations of Godard, foregrounds structures of cinematic discourse and artifice so that the material identity of the film ceases to be a structure made invisible in service of the diegesis, but becomes instead the primary focus of textual attention. It is in this respect that the paracinematic aesthetic is closely linked to the concept of excess. In other words, a lot of the time with paracinema, which includes exploitation films, the structure and style of the film is actually the most important aspect of it. What was Korine trying to say with this sensory style of filmmaking? He kinda says it here.
It's about kids that are raised on video games and raised on YouTube clips and raised
television babies.
All the way back in 2013, Corinne was seeing a shift in youth culture in the way that it prioritizes sensation above all else. We can no longer sit still anymore, but rather we chase these quick rushes of dopamine wherever we can.
Just can pretend like it's a video game.
If it's 6-second vines and now TikToks, or in the sensational violence of video games, or in party drugs, we're chasing momentary ecstasy, and companies are quick to deliver it to us in every facet of life imaginable. As Amanda Nix astutely points out in her defense of the film, we are able to laugh at ridiculously over-the-top characters and alarming scenes like that because they seem so far removed from reality. The only way this movie works is that the very premise is that it's supposed to feel like a fever dream. If it were shot in a lucid, realistic way, the amusing elements go away and we're just stuck with really frightening imagery. So the message comes through form. I'm watching a movie about girls chasing experience who approach life with a zero-sum mentality and refuse to see the consequences of their actions, or rather do not receive consequences because they're pretty and white. And here I am, chasing experience by going out to watch this film. Am I watching Spring Breakers for the plot, or am I watching it to get that quick rush of dopamine that it gives me? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Lovers of paracinema, of the bad and the tasteless, may be able to see this double meaning of Spring Breakers. And it's the people who appreciate it for what it is, pure trash, who will love it forever. "2013 was a confused time in history, a time that stood on the precipice of major cultural upheaval, where the frontiers of social technology were still open, and we lived in relative ignorance of what was to come. But it was also the beginning of unprecedented progressive change, when a new consciousness was starting to form. After tiptoeing over the edge, we finally went over. We fell into a pit of darkness and opened our eyes to Trump and the Me Too era. Surfaces stopped being so glossy, and we started to see things for what they were. Terry and Dove were sexual predators, Gavin McInnes was a Proud Boy, Mark Hunter was dating a minor, our celebrity idols were partying a little too hard, and the ignorance could no longer continue. While it's cool that the aesthetics of my youth are coming back into fashion, I think it's important we don't glamorize this era too heavily. Coming out of such a dark period, right out of a worldwide pandemic, I think people just want to shut themselves off and relive those carefree glory days. Like Carrera told me, indie sleaze resurfaces in a post-COVID moment where there is an interest in transgression and playful rule-breaking. After an extended period of pandemic-era civil obedience, many are looking to make mistakes and let loose. But this no fucks given attitude comes with consequences. I don't know if a film as amoral as Spring Breakers could be made today. I mean, compare it to aesthetically similar films that came after it, like Assassination Nation or Zola, both of which were driven by story, politics, and morals first. Spring Breakers, on the other hand, gives us all spectacle with no heart. It's a perfect emblem of the fast-paced ambiguity of the indie sleaze era, a time when digital media was accelerating access to all kinds of imagery and lifestyles, with no context or meaning. The years that followed indie sleaze exposed these romanticized images of debauchery and sexual freedom as participating in a darker realm of exploitation and abuse.
He's sexist, and by the way, I'd like him to write me a check, because he's sexist.
Looking at it from the future, Spring Breakers embodies the confusion of 2013. It's by no means an easy movie, or a pleasant one, but if you turn your brain off and just go along for the ride, it's a lot of fun. It wears its superficiality proudly, and delivers on those fast pleasures it knows we want so bad. It wears indie sleaze in a new medium, and encompasses all of the duality wrapped up in it. Indie sleaze looks fun and carefree, but has darkness lurking beneath. Indie sleaze pushes us to chase false freedom, and just like in the film, freedom in our society comes at a cost. Special thank you to Louis Osta, Syed Hassan, Malpertui, Cooper Stimson, Nina E., Jessica, Nadia C., Nick, Jenny Eller, Daniel, The Wiz Daniel, D.H. Klein, Francesca Downs, Juvaria, and Nina Ray for supporting this channel.